Greetings from Tuskegee University. I'm Oma Karki. I'm going to present on soil test, taking samples, test results, and applying amendments to the soil based on the soil test results. This is one of the sessions in the Sustainable Around Pasture and Grazing training series that we have developed to educate county agents, educators, and farmers and landowners. So first of all, let me just talk about very basic aspects of soil health. So the healthy soil is required to be the soil very productive. So for the soil to be productive, it has to have required nutrients for the crops or pasture that are grown in the field. It has to have a right kind of pH for the type of forage species that we are growing. It needs to have enough moisture content for forage production, and the appropriate amount of organic matter in the soil, which matters because of the soil's capacity to hold the nutrients, to hold the water, to have the porous structure for aeration of the soil roots, to utilize and to have the nutrient, water, air in the soil. That porous structure is very, very important, and that is related to the organic matter content in the soil. So aeration, as already mentioned, aeration or porous structure of soil is important and necessary for air, water, nutrient movement in the soil. And there are other aspects of the productivity and soil health, but we don't have that much time to talk about all those other aspects. So soil health, there are three major aspects of soil health: physical health, chemical health, and biological health. The examples of physical health includes the particle size of the soil aggregate structure. So the aggregate structure of the soil is very important for the physical health of the soil. That aggregated structure would be developed with the binding of soil particles together, and then it will form the porous structure into the soil profile, and that will facilitate the movement of air, water, and nutrients into the soil profile and the development of the soil root. I mean the crop roots there. So aggregate structure of the soil, the porous structure of soil will be depending on how well we manage the pasture soil through the appropriate cultivation and the appropriate management of that field. However, particle size wouldn't have that much of a control. So chemical property will be some of the aspect will be the nutrients and enzymes and other different chemicals present in the soil. And then for the soil health, chemical soil health, all these different chemicals, useful chemicals should be there, and they have a the healthy interaction of these different components, chemical interaction and reaction, for the soil to be healthy and productive. So biological health of the soil will be involved with the inclusion of lots of microbes, useful microbes in the soil, their interaction, their action and interaction for making the soil healthy, earthworms and their activities in the soil, and then different beneficial insects that are present in the soil, and other different creatures that are beneficial in the soil and their activities. So soil is not just the dirt, it is the living biological entity with the certain chemical and physical properties. So with that, we need to understand this healthy soil is required for it to be productive. So in that sense, soil test is very necessary to maintain the soil productive. So periodic soil test is necessary for us to find out what the soil pH is, how much is the nutrients available in the soil for growing any crops or forages. So that's why regular soil test is necessary. So for permanent pasture, every 2 to 3 years, soil test has to be done. So permanent pasture means if we plant forages in a pasture and it may be growing for multiple years without us having to plant again, that kind of pasture are called permanent pasture. For example, the Bahia grass field, Bermuda grass field, if they are managed properly, we don't have to plant once they are well established and if they are maintained sustainably. In the annual pastures or pasture that has to be overseeded, for example, if we have a perennial grass pasture and if we want to overseed it with the other annual warm season forages or cool season forages, at that time we need to take the soil sample and test to find the requirement of those forages that are to be planted. So that has to be done 3 to 6 months prior to the planting date. Let me talk about the pH range. As you know, pH ranges from 0 to 14, and the pH 7 means the neutral. Below 7 is called acidic, and above 7 is called alkaline or basic soil. So broad range of pH that is suitable for growing most of the Alabama forages in Alabama would be 5.8 to 6.5. And we need to be mindful for growing legume forages such as clovers, vetches, peas, soybeans. Those kind of forages needs higher pH as compared to the grass forages like Bahia grass, Bermuda grass, or millets or small grains. So for growing alfalfa, it may be close to 7 pH is required. For other leguminous forages, maybe 6.5 to 7 will be good. So this chart over here showing the nutrient availability that are present in the soil at different pH levels. So if we look at the nitrogen, you see the band. The wider band means the higher availability to the plant roots of these nutrients. So if we look at the nitrogen, the width, the band narrows below pH 6.0 and again above 8.5 or even little greater than pH 8. So that means the 6 to kind of 8 pH is the ideal for nitrogen fertilizer available to the plant roots. And if you look at the potassium fertilizer, again, its availability decreases below pH 6, and it continues from 6 to all the way to pH 10. If you look at the phosphorus, this 5.5 and below 5.5, this availability narrows, and over here between 7.5 and 8.5 it narrows and again increases. So looking at this band, you will have an idea like what kind of pH should be maintained in the soil for different kind of nutrients to be available for the plant roots. So maintaining soil at the right pH is very, very important, because although there are different kind of nutrients present in the soil, they may not be available to the plant roots if pH is not suitable for these fertilizers to be available to the plant roots, as it is seen in this chart. So let me talk about some different classification of the mineral nutrients that are required for plants. So macronutrients are those nutrients which are required in a greater quantity to the growth and maintenance of the forages, and that among the micronutrients, nitrogen is one of the very important, one of the major nutrients. So this is, as you know, it is fixed by leguminous forages or leguminous plants. If these plants are associated with the right kind of rhizobium bacteria, so they can fix those bacteria associates with the leguminous roots, form nodules, and fix the atmospheric nitrogen and make that nitrogen available to the plant roots. If they have a conducive environment, soil environment, that also includes pH, moisture, and different other conditions for them to work in the soil for fixing the nitrogen. So in general, if you have the leguminous field or the field containing legume mixed with the grasses, with legume containing 1/3 of the stand, then nitrogen fertilizer, adding the commercial nitrogen fertilizer will not be necessary. So another attribute of nitrogen fertilizer is this is unstable fertilizer. That's why it is recommended to apply the nitrogen fertilizer in divided doses. That will talk more about how to divide doses and how to apply, how much to apply and when in the upcoming slides. So another macronutrient is phosphorus, and this is the more stable fertilizer as compared to nitrogen and potassium. So annual application of phosphorus fertilizer is enough. We don't need to apply multiple times the phosphorus fertilizer within a year. So potassium fertilizer, 2 or more application annually will be required, but although it should be based on the recommendation from the soil test. So secondary nutrients are those nutrients, their requirements will be less than those for macronutrients that we talked about in the earlier slide. So calcium, magnesium, sulfur are classified as the secondary nutrients for plants, for forages. So micronutrients are those which are required in very small amount, but still they are necessary for a different function of plants. So usually when you do the soil test, only the 3 macronutrients are tested and recommended for the soil, for the pasture soil, unless we request them to do more. And if we have to do, we need to specify in the sheet that what test we are sending that sample for, that we'll talk about later, about the details of sending the soil samples and requests for the test. So usually when you do test for the macronutrients, and if forages perform well, we don't have to worry about secondary nutrients and micronutrients. However, if we apply all the recommended macronutrients based on the soil test and still forages are not doing well, then we may want to test for other nutrients, whether any of the other nutrients are deficient. And if it is, then we have to go and apply those deficient nutrients as well. So animal manure is one of the good source for plant nutrients, and it is also a good source for organic matter. However, when we apply the animal manure for supplying the nutrients, it will be a good idea to do the testing, what kind of nutrients are available there, and find out the quantity, how much quantity you will need to apply in the field to supply the required nutrients for growing any type of forages. So let me talk about the collection of soil samples, how to collect soil samples. So usually 15 to 20 core samples should be collected from a uniform field up to 20 acres. Uniform means having a similar soil type, similar topography, and growing similar type of forages. If we have 20 acres or less of that field with the uniformity, then take 15 to 20 core samples. Okay. So how deep we should go to collect the samples? It is up to 4 inches deep from the ground surface for the permanent pasture. Permanent pasture means pasture once we plant and then manage well. We don't have to plant again, like Bahia grass pasture, Bermuda grass pasture. Those are the permanent pasture. So in this kind of pasture, 0 means ground surface to 4 inches deep. We need to go and collect samples from. And for annual pasture or pasture that requiring overseeding, that we need to go up to 6 inches deep from the ground surface. So while collecting the soil samples, we need to remove all the debris layer on the top, any leaves or any twigs or anything on the surface, remove that and collect the soil samples. So over here is the kind of scheme, what we need to be mindful of while collecting the samples. Always we need to avoid the area concentrated with the plant nutrients, like coming from the animal manure or animal excreta, such as where animals will be gathering, like around watering areas or feeding areas or in the shelter. Those should be the areas where animal would be gathering and defecating and urinating, and those areas will have a different concentration of nutrients. So those areas should be avoided while collecting the soil samples. Also, if we have this driveway with the limestone, those should also be avoided. So how far we should be avoiding collecting the sample from? This is 150 feet radius. That much area we shouldn't be collecting the samples from. Okay, and from the remaining area, we should pretty much go every corner, every area, just in every corner and center, and like as soon in here, different areas. You may do different working pattern and all that. So keeping in mind, the sample we collect from the field should represent the field, entire field. That's the whole idea. Okay. So what are the materials required for collecting samples? We need the sample collection tools, such as the soil core sample, this, or shovel or trowel. If this is very convenient if you have the soil core sampler, or if you can just request your county agent or somebody working with the NRCS. If you call them and request, they may come and take a sample for you, or they will let you borrow the soil core sample. Or you can also do the same thing with using the shovel or a troll if the soil is loose, like that from the garden. And you'll need a big container like this bucket here. When you collect all this soil core, like 15 to 20 samples from different area of that field, put in the bucket, and you will need the sample bag. So all that sample put in the bucket, and then remove all non-soil material from those samples, such as that can be pebbles, leaves, roots, and any other non-soil material. Mix all samples well in that bucket and label the box, that soil sample box, with your name, address, and plot or field ID, and forage species that are already growing there, or you are planning to plant. And fill the labeled sample box with uniformly mixed sample from that bucket. Close the box properly and send the box to the soil lab with your proper payment. So let me share with you a brief video for how to collect soil samples and mix it and put in the box.
Establishing forages. Forage plants acquire all the necessary nutrients and water as necessary for the survival. Therefore, it is very important to check the nutrient status and acidity of pasture soils regularly. Lime and or fertilizer as necessary to establish forages and maintain their productivity. Soil samples should be tested several months before planting seeds, so that recommended lime can be incorporated into the pasture soil in order to obtain a right pH by the time of planting. Representative soil samples should be prepared by collecting 15 to 20 random subsamples in a zigzag manner from a 20-acre or smaller plot with uniform soil type, forage species, and topography. Subsamples should be collected from a 0 to 4 inch depth for perennial pastures and 0 to 6 inches or to the depth of tillage for annual pastures. While collecting samples, areas such as shade, watering and feeding facilities, and manure piles should be avoided by not collecting samples from within 150-foot radius of these areas. All subsamples should be collected in a clean bucket and mixed thoroughly. Then, a pint of composite soil sample should be put in a sample bag. Close it. Label it with owner's name, address, field name, and forage species that are growing or to be planted. The samples should be sent to the nearest soil testing laboratory with required payment. Weed control. Weeds are any plant growing out of place according to our defined land use goals. Weeds and goat pest.
So all the time we have to be mindful, apply lime and fertilizers based on soil test recommendation. So test report and lime application. So once we submit the soil samples to the lab, they will send the report within a week. Generally less than a week, maybe 3-4 days, you'll get a report. Let me go and show you the example reports, what it looked like. So this is one of the reports that was from one of our research site. So you can see here the name, the other, that address, and some other information for the sample address. So basic thing, we need to be mindful over here, the date, test date, sample designation, that is the field name. So if we have seen the field name on the soil sample box, that should be um, presented here. So that way we'll know which sample is which. That's why it is very important to give the field name properly. So once the soil sample comes in, there shouldn't be any doubt to understand the soil test report. So for the crop, that is also from what we have labeled in the soil box. So Bahia Pasture, if we look at this row in here, soil group is 2. That description about the soil group is given below, and you can read what 2 or 1 means. So 2 means loam and light clays, and this is cation exchange capacity. Over here, sandy soil, that would be soil group 1. Over here, this field has a soil group 1. Another field has soil group 2. So if you get a different kind of grouping, that you just look at the note below the table and you will see what that means. 3 means clay and soil high in organic matter, and 4 is clay of the black belt. So high in organic matter there also. That's a cation exchange capacity high. So let me go back up to the very first row. And over here, pH 5.9. So for Viagra's, they have not recommended any lime to be applied for growing Viagra's pasture. Same thing with the crabgrass and millets. So no lime has been recommended to be applied for that field. And if you look at there, under here in this block, soil test results, and phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, calcium. Over here, see high, all these components are high for these forages. And limestone recommendation 0, so we don't need to apply any lime. Over here, nitrogen 60 pound per acre for all of these forages here. And P2O5, this is phosphorus, not recommended. K2O, that means potassium, not recommended. So if you go down, you can understand what is recommended, what is not recommended here, and we need to apply accordingly. Okay, that is how the soil test report looking like. That is from Auburn University. If you have sent your soil to other laboratory than Auburn, you may find a different kind of report. I mean, the format may be a little different, but that is basically they would be recommending something. So based on that soil test report, we have to apply lime 3 to 6 months prior to planting. And this is the picture showing the lime being applied in the field. And application of lime is very straightforward. It would come like this much ton per acre, and we just go and buy and apply that much lime to that field, following the rate recommended. And fertilizer calculation, we need to do the calculate the fertilizer, how much fertilizer is needed, because that recommended fertilizer is the component of that nutrients, not the actual fertilizer. If you go and buy urea fertilizer, and if 60 pound of nitrogen has been recommended, then we need to calculate how much of that urea fertilizer has to be applied if we use urea as a source of nitrogen, or if we use ammonium nitrate as the source of nitrogen, then we need to calculate how much of that fertilizer needs to be applied to that field. So I would like to share with you the calculation sheet. This is a very simple spreadsheet that you can develop and calculate on your own. And I will also walk you through the chemical fertilizer calculation site that is developed by the Auburn University Soil Testing Lab. Here you can see an Excel sheet here developed to calculate the required amount of fertilizer, recommended fertilizer. In this sheet, you can see the recommended fertilizer pounds per acre, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Based on the report that I shared with you earlier from the lab, that 60 pounds of nitrogen per acre was recommended for by-acre grass pasture. And when you calculate that using the urea fertilizer, it comes for 5 acres area, it comes 652, and you see the formula is there, and I will describe that a little bit later down in this sheet. Same thing we can do for calculating the phosphorus and potash fertilizer. For calculating it, we need to know which kind of fertilizer we want to apply, or which kind of fertilizer is available nearby your farm, where what you can buy, and which is less costly for you to apply. So over here, it has described very clearly: multiply the area with recommended fertilizer rate and nutrient concentration of the given fertilizer for each type of forage that is coming from your result, soil test report. So for example, over there, for plot 1, amount of nitrogen fertilizer required was recommended as 60 pounds per acre for 5-acre area, and using the urea fertilizer, which contains 46% of nitrogen, then it comes to 652 pounds for that 5-acre field. So same thing we can do for calculating the required amount of phosphorus, if phosphorus is recommended, or for potassium fertilizer, if potassium fertilizer is recommended. Okay, that's how we can calculate the required amount of different fertilizer recommended to be applied to the given field. Now, this is another resource provided by the Auburn University Soil Testing Laboratory for calculating the required amount of chemical fertilizer that is recommended from your soil test report. Over here, this is the shell to include the recommended amount of nitrogen fertilizer. So if you check the case from earlier soil test report shown in the presentation, that was 60 pounds per acre. So let me put 60 pounds, and this is 0 and 0. So, and over here from the drop-down menu, we can select the fertilizer type for supplying the nitrogen fertilizer. Let me go ahead and select ammonium nitrate, which contains 34% of nitrogen. And if we do that, select it and calculate. So let's look at the output down there. It has calculated 180 pounds of that fertilizer, ammonium nitrate fertilizer needed per acre. So if we have multiple acres, we can multiply with this 180 and find out for that entire field. So if we do select another type of fertilizer from this drop-down menu, maybe nitrogen with, what is another nitrogen type? So over here is the nitrogen coming from urea. Urea is the source of nitrogen, and if we select that, which contains 46% of nitrogen, in the fertilizer. So if I do that and it is and calculate, it is giving 130 pounds per acre of this fertilizer needed to satisfy or to supply 60 pounds of nitrogen to the field per acre. So similarly, if we have also required phosphorus fertilizer, and we can put the recommended amount, for example, let me put 40 and 40 pounds per acre of phosphorus and potassium, and we can select another kind of fertilizer to supply more than one kind of fertilizer. So there are the choices we have, and if we select one of them, it will be not supplying all the fertilizers at one time. Let me use that one, and it is recommending the different thing over here, and it's saying this much pound needed per acre for recommended nitrogen rate, with surplus of phosphorus this much and with surplus potassium this much. So there are a couple of options. Either we can buy these fertilizers separately based on the recommended rate and apply separately. Buy separately, apply separately. That nitrogen fertilizer definitely we have to buy separately and apply separately. That we'll talk about later on in this presentation. And we can maybe do the same with the phosphorus and potassium. Sometimes you may buy separately, and then the co-op people may blend it for you to fulfill the requirement of your soil. So as there are different options to buy and apply the fertilizer, different kind of fertilizer in different ways. You also have to do the cost calculation, which fertilizer will be a best buy for you in terms of economics and the how much nutrients you will be buying per dollar. If you buy fertilizer A versus fertilizer B, this is the some little exercise that you need to do, think about and do to have more efficiently to buy the right kind of fertilizer for the less dollar amount. So as we have already talked about, phosphorus and potassium fertilizers are more stable as compared to nitrogen fertilizer. That's why we can apply phosphorus and potassium fertilizer as at the time of planting or a little bit early than planting time. Maybe 1 week in advance you can do that, or you may just wait and apply the fertilizer on the same time at the same time when you do the planting. For nitrogen fertilizer, as this fertilizer is unstable as compared to phosphorus and potassium, it is recommended that we apply the nitrogen fertilizer in divided doses. So also we need to understand the nitrogen fertilizer the plants will be utilizing when they are able to do the photosynthesis. So when most of the seeds germinate and develop a couple of leaves and they look green in the field, that's the time to apply the first dose of nitrogen fertilizer. So apply 50% when fields look green, and the next 50% apply that after the first or second rotation in the pasture or in the hay field after the first cutting or second cutting, depending on the just their requirement. So these pictures over here just showing the fertilizer application over here, this fertilizer being spread in the field. This is just the container with the fertilizer there. So over this chart, we need to be mindful too much fertilizer is bad and wastage of money. Too much fertilizer is bad for the forages, and it is also wastage of money and time. In this chart, you can see these vertical axis representing yield of the forages, and this horizontal axis representing the amount of fertilizer applied. So up to this point, this fertilizer application is less than required. That's why the yield is keep on increasing until this point. And at this point, this is at the optimal level, beginning from here to all the way here. So our target should be just stopping fertilizer application right here somewhere. If we go beyond this optimum level, there is no increase of forage production. So this will be just the wastage of fertilizer here in this region. And over here, this is the excess application of fertilizer, much beyond than the requirement of forages. And at this level, these fertilizers will act as the toxic to these crops. So definitely never we should be applying too much fertilizer. That's why soil test is very, very important to find out how much fertilizer is required and which kind of fertilizer is required. And all the time we need to follow the results, soil test results, to apply the right kind of fertilizer and the right amount of fertilizer. So key points: do your soil test periodically for permanent pasture every 2 to 3 years, for annual forages each year, 3 to 6 months prior to planting date of the forage, and apply needed lime and fertilizer based on the soil test recommendation. It is very, very important so that we are not applying too much or not applying when it is required. Lime 3 to 6 months prior to the planting date. Phosphorus and potassium fertilizers, apply those fertilizers sometimes before planting or at the time of planting, based on which works for you better. Nitrogen fertilizer, apply that in the divided doses, 50% when the or most of the seeds germinate and looks green, the field looks green, and the remaining 50% after the first or second rotational grazing or the hay cutting. So this is the picture showing the scenario of the pasture not taken care of well. Over here is the pasture soil tested, planted the forages, applied the lime and fertilizers, and planted suitable forages to the soil type present in the field. And you can see the animals enjoying that good forages there. This practice overall saved a good amount of money. This is the calculation done for winter and spring grazing. So this is the end of the presentation, and I thank you very much for watching this presentation, this video, and I hope you enjoyed and learned something new, and definitely you found it very useful. We will be just putting other videos that will be useful for developing and maintaining healthy pastures and keeping animals healthy. Please look out for that. Thank you again.